Under. This happened to me around Labor Day. I really haven't found the wherewithal to talk too much about it until now. This is probably something I need to get off my chest because, well, you'll see. So let me think. Right, it was Friday, over the weekend before Memorial Day. Well, technically the Saturday. See, this is what working third shift technical support will get you in the head. I wiped that sinking Monster Energy drink hangover blur from my eyes as I walked out of my call center and into the dark blue morning air. I waved goodbye to my coworkers and walked a half block to a separate lot. The fact was our lot wasn't only just small, but it was also not lit, no cameras, and was the target of vandals. I found it much safer to park my truck between the bank overhang and a higher-end grocery store. I couldn't really take chances with it. My truck wasn't great, but it was the most valuable thing I had. COVID, even with the unemployment benefits and stimulus checks, pretty much wiped me out, and I was behind on many things. Needless to say, repairing or replacing my truck wasn't in the cards, so I was definitely trying to preserve it. Anyway, it was the Saturday of my 5 nights on before 4 days off. Well, it was going to be 5 days off with the holiday carryover, and that always meant my head was swimming, and getting even just the 6 miles back to home to bed was going to be a struggle. I was only working there since about April when things started looking good, and I wasn't acclimated to working nights. Sometimes I'd pat myself down for my keys while they were in my other hand when I reached my truck. Sometimes I'd hop in and forget to put it in reverse. Other times I just wanted to nod off there until someone called the police on me. Even though I was walking a few blocks, the world was still a dull, dark blue blur through a squinty, headachy eyes. I got in my truck, being extra careful to avoid the rusty Toyota with a flat tire someone had left there a few days ago. The city cops apparently came around last night and slapped some orange stickers on the thing, warning it to move. I shut my door. I started my engine. I remembered to put it in reverse. See, when you're tired like this, everything is a snapshot and episodic. You don't have that connective tissue tracing the last action to the current one. So when I realized the engine was running, I eased my foot off the brake and onto the gas to pull out of the spot. And that's when I heard it. For it was a small jolt in the truck. Then it was a loud, visceral, shrill scream. It was so loud and so shrill, I'm still haunted by it. It was absolutely the sound of someone's life getting crushed out of them in one go. I stomped on my brakes immediately. I was breathless and all my hair stood up on end. I was starting to cry as I stepped out of the car. I just knew that I had hurt someone very, very badly, and I may have actually killed them by accident. My hands were shaking as I took out my phone, and I hurried to the back of my truck. To my amazement and relief, there was nobody there, no one at all. I checked underneath and all around. I even went around the dark side of the grocery store, and there was nothing there but overfilled dumpsters and a stack of pallets. I retraced my steps all around the car, to the front of the store, to the bank, twice, checking for anyone, checking for a trail of blood, signs of any disturbance. Nothing and no one was around at all. The high-end grocery store wasn't even open yet. There were no other cars around but the abandoned one and mine. By the time I stepped back into my truck, I was plenty awake now, having apparently misheard something else for that scream, and evidently not becoming involved in a double life-altering experience. I put the vehicle back in reverse, and I was surprised when my backup alarms started going off. I mean, like, really going off, like I was an inch or less away from backing into a Hummer. I checked my rear view, side view, and even turned my head all the way around and saw the same easy 10 feet of clearance between my truck's tail and the building I parked next to. With that, I ignored the alarm, pulled out, and went home. Home was a small, 4-story apartment building. The parking lot was empty, like most Saturday mornings, except for a shiny new Mustang. Since I started to come down from my adrenaline rush, I was confused by the sight of the car, and then I realized it was Don Smith. the landlord's new car, as he came walking around from the far side of the building. He was clad in sleeveless top that said CrossFit, and his wraparound sunglasses said the rest about him. He owned 4 different buildings around town he inherited from his parents. Back in the day, I heard they were actually okay places to be, but now, with Don always on the prowl, ready to jump at any situation, he felt that he could somehow get double rent for the places. His favorite plot, so to speak, was sniffing around for weed on Saturday mornings, calling the police, getting the eviction with their rent, and then getting new tenants in as soon as possible. Even if it wasn't at the highest rate he could charge, he still figured making 175% rent off of one room he'd normally collect 100% from was the best thing for him. Naturally, also, he skimped out on things like maintenance and maintenance calls. Anyway, like I said, I was behind on rent from the whole COVID thing, and before you say there were programs for that, my answer to that is not when you live in a state that didn't take the money or took the money and is now building prisons with that money. Anyway, Don was the last person I wanted to see, and I'm assuming he was thinking the same way about me. Or maybe not. There was a big smile on his face when he saw me leave my truck. It seemed to suggest otherwise. He stepped close enough to me that I needed to look up to him, which was almost certainly intentional on his part. He told me in no uncertain words that any slack I was getting, or perceived I was getting from him, was officially over. You have until exactly 8 a.m., not next Saturday, but the Saturday after that. You hear, when I get back from vacation, I'm expecting the money, and if I don't get it, it's eviction time. No more second chances. Are we clear? Like I said, I was getting tired again, and I swallowed funny, so instead of giving him the satisfaction of choking on my words, I simply nodded and tried to move past him. Don got in my way, and he put up his arms around me like a cage. Hey bro, have some self-respect, okay? It's all about self-respect, so let me try to teach you some, bro. Tell me you get it. I tried to answer affirmatively, but as I feared, I did cough on my own words. I get it. Money in 2 weeks or eviction. Check. He gave me 2 thumbs up before reminding me he'll cut a couple hundred off what I owe him if he can tell me any of my neighbors had drugs. And then he got in his loud car and left. I slept a few hours, but I couldn't stay asleep. Unlike my usual worries about rent and other things, I was still unnerved by that scream I heard. So I gave up on trying to sleep and just started doing my usual chores and cooking for the weekend. It was getting to be around 5 p.m. and a deep overcast was setting in. In my night shift absent-mindedness, I let some chicken expire. Not just a little bit expire, but really, really expire, and so I needed to get some more for dinner. I drove down to the discount store without incident to buy some chicken to replace the stuff that went bad, and by the time I picked up a few other things, the clouds and night had really set in. I got back into my truck and started it to put it into reverse. This time I checked my mirrors before lifting my foot away. Bright red and white taillights illuminated the space 6 feet behind me, and it was clear, but my backup alarm was going crazy again. An alarm was nothing to be too worried about, but I triple-checked as I left the lot. I arrived home without further incident, but as I pulled into my usual parking spot, I noticed a strange distortion and shadow cast behind me. It looked vaguely like a small person, maybe a child, but the outline was almost skinny, like sheathed in black plastic, or maybe some sort of polished leather. The distortion only lasted a second. I left my car in a hurry with my groceries, hoping to stay within the temporary lighting, and I hit the remote lock when I reached my lit porch. Maybe I got a little excited, or maybe a little scared, as I passed away from the beam of my taillights, and I tripped, and I took a hard fall. The fall was so unexpected that I went in a full front arm brace and tossed my groceries into the shadows. The sounds of the night, the crickets, the cicadas, even the passing traffic seemed to take a deep breath and hold it. I got back up and showed my keychain flashlight around that I kept from the dark mornings and late nights. I checked to see what I tripped on, but I couldn't find anything. No divots, no holes, no rocks or debris. I brushed off my hands and patted my head. It had been a long week, I thought to myself, as I turned my light around to gather up my groceries. I found 2 out of 3 bags intact, but the third one, the one that held the chicken, it was ripped up into thin strands. The boneless chicken breasts were nowhere to be found. I searched around my truck with the flashlight and finally ducked under to see if it got tossed underneath by accident. I saw nothing. I swallowed hard and told myself some hungry raccoon, cat, or something else maybe got my chicken in the split second between dropping it and finding it. I told myself I'd be having some very nice rice and broccoli without the chicken tonight. The next day around noon, I took my garbage out and decided to see if maybe I could find the wrapper or styrofoam container the chicken came in somewhere around my property. I knelt down to see if anything got carried underneath the dumpster. As I turned around, I found something sitting underneath my truck. It was a raccoon. A dead raccoon. I don't recall seeing a dead raccoon or anything for that matter the night before when I parked. I took a discarded cardboard tube out of the dumpster and poked the carcass into the light of day. I was immediately struck by the fact that the fur was intact on top and on the sides, but the eyes were like something sucked all the jelly out of it like a gummy bear and left the skin deflated and flapped over itself. The nose was missing, and its dead clean bone was exposed. As I prodded the poor thing with the tube, I realized it had no flesh at all. No muscle, no fat. It was just the fur, and that shagged apart as I prodded it. As the fur sloughed off, I could see the crumpled up chicken packaging, plastic wrap, and styrofoam shell and all tucked into the hollow spaces between the bone. I used the tube to deposit the carcass into the trash and decided to go about my errands. Of course, this time, I heard that scream again as I backed up, and my backup alarm was going absolutely bonkers again. As I drove, my headlights were turning on and off by themselves, and my radio tuned itself. The motorized side view mirrors tilted in circles. The final straw for me was when the turn signals stopped working. I could get a ticket for that, and that was the last thing that I needed. So, I decided to turn into my friend's auto shop to see if there was anything going on with the truck. It wasn't exactly in my budget, but I knew a ticket wasn't either, and James would at least charge me friend prices. He was able to get me in quick, and I asked him, just out of vague curiosity, to see if he could check underneath the car as well. In about 30 minutes he came back. He told me he didn't find anything wrong with the electrical system, nor anything strange going on underneath the truck. It was still $80, and I was frustrated with myself, as the truck seemed fine the rest of the trip. I got home later than expected, and it was overcast and starting to drizzle a bit. As I pulled into my parking lot, the radio started to tune itself again. The stations flipped so often I could only make out a few words as it cycled. Food, zzz, eat, zzz, meat, zzz, meat, zzz, hungry, zzz. It did this for a solid minute, as I sat with my hands off the wheel and the radio. I decided against my better judgment to kneel down and take a look underneath the truck myself again. I bent down to inspect the undercarriage. I could immediately make out something that didn't belong there. At first it looked like a dark plastic bag crumpled up between the body and the exhaust. As I turned over to get a better look, I could see the bag was slowly expanding and contracting, almost as if it were breathing. I could see strands of the shiny leathery material strung around other components. I reached up to pick off a strand, and I immediately recoiled. The strand burned my fingers, but not because it was too hot, but because it was so cold. The bag puffed up into one large bulge about the size of a grapefruit, and then a cluster of 6 smaller ones inflated to the size of grapes. An X-like marking appeared on the surface, and slowly the X's separated into 4 small triangles against a white surface underneath. It took me a moment to realize that I was being seen by this thing's eye, or eyes. I was mortified, but I tried to back away slowly, like I had just found a wasp's nest and trying to avoid appearing as a threat. But whatever it was, let out that same horrific scream again. The right cuff of my flannel overshirt was nabbed with 3 of the strands. They seemed to immediately attach themselves to it and yank further under the truck. The strands hadn't actually made contact with my skin at all, so I was able to quickly pull my arm free of the sleeve. I had now to spin, now with my back of my head pressed against the bottom of the door of the truck so I could remove my other arm from the shirt that was quickly being sucked under the truck by that thing. As I was released from my own shirt-turned shackles, I made a mad dart for the shelter, only to be grabbed around the ankle and dragged back. At first I felt coolness and numbness run from the grasping point up on my leg and into my stomach, but then it was a burn, and then it felt like electricity. I tried to yelp, but nothing came out. I struggled and convulsed, succeeding only in flipping myself from my stomach to my back and getting one foot up on the running boards, bracing myself against it. In that moment of sheer fear, I kind of realized that maybe this thing didn't like the light so much. So, when I let go for just half a second, I was able to get my flashlight up and out and shine it underneath the truck. Whatever that thing was let out its very human-like scream again and released my leg. I was able to limp back to my apartment and inspect my leg. My foot, leg, and calf was beet red and swollen to nearly gigantic proportions. I had next to no feeling below my hip, and I could barely bend my knee. I had to take a scissors and kitchen knife to my shoe to free my oversized foot. I slept the next 24 hours. The swelling was going down, but I still had very little feeling or control over my leg. I called off work, of course. I wasn't going anywhere near my truck, and walking was completely out of the question as I struggled just to move from my bed to the bathroom. I ended up calling off the entire week, which probably meant I lost my job, since the company had a strict policy against calling off prior to a holiday weekend. By early Friday morning, it was still dark out. I started to be able to move and coordinate my leg and foot again. I was lying in bed as I could hear Don's car pull up next to mine. I could hear him stomp through the weeds and loudly sniff around the property one last time before leaving on his vacation. My sleep schedule was totally off, and I was still dazed in disbelief of it all. I was out $80 and a week's worth of pay. I'd lost my job. I still owed this asshole rent in about 5 days. On top of everything, that thing was living under my truck, in my truck. Not just living, but eating. Maybe even breeding when I considered those little grape-sized things underneath the bigger one. It occurred to me that it probably came from that white car I parked next to. And that's when I realized that's probably what I'd have to do. On a bright sunny day, I'd have to drive that truck to the middle of nowhere. Anywhere but here, and just leave it. And hope that whatever it is dies of starvation underneath it. I could hear Don walking past my window again. He was singing softly to himself. "Boats! I'm on a MF'n boat!" I listened to his door open and shut and his engine start. Then he abruptly stopped, and I could hear his door swing open and his panicked feet shuffle through the parking lot gravel. "What the hell was that?" I could hear him yell to no one in particular. I rolled over in bed and peeked out the window through the blinds and watched Don scratch his head as he inspected the rear of his car and peered down the street both ways. I let go of the blinds, rolled over, and I put a big smile on my face as I listened to him drive away for the last time.